Where do you come from, Ted?
Originally from Mytholmroyd in West Yorkshire, near Halifax.
And what about you, Sylvia?
Oh, I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, but I think I'm over here in England to stay now.
Well, somehow or another there's a meeting between Yorkshire and the United States. Would you like to tell us how it happened?
Well, I left Cambridge in 1954, but I still had friends there that I used to go back and see now and again. And one of these friends produced a poetry magazine. This magazine just saw one issue. Anyway, I had some poems in this, and we had a celebration the day it came out.
To which I came. I happened to be at Cambridge. I was sent there by the government on a government grant, and I'd read some of Ted's poems in this magazine. I was very impressed, and I wanted to meet him. And I went to this little celebration, and that's actually where we met.
How did you develop this first meeting?
Well, I think we saw each other again on a Friday the 13th or something, in London, didn't we, somehow, after this? And then we saw a great deal of each other. Ted came back to Cambridge, and suddenly we found ourselves getting married a few months later.
I'd saved some cash. I'd been working for about 3 months, and everything I'd saved, I blew it in on a courtship, which lasted about 3 months.
What was the actual form of this proposal?
We kept writing poems to each other, and then it just grew out of that, I guess, a feeling that we both were writing so much and having such a fine time doing it. We decided that this should keep on.
The poems haven't really survived. The marriage overtook the poems.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, in none of these books of poetry is there anything, apart from the dedications to Ted, to Sylvia, which really I could interpret as being to each other or even about each other.
Well, I think that all the poems that we wrote to each other and about each other were really before our marriage, and then something happened. I don't know what it was. I hope it was all to the good, but we began to be able to, well, somehow free ourselves for other subjects. And I think the dedications, at least as far as mine goes, I feel that I'd never be writing as I am and as much as I am without Ted's understanding and cooperation, really.
Have you actually been to the States yourself, Ted?
Yes, I was there about 3 years, and while I was over there, I taught, and we traveled around America. And I got enough money to live. When we came back here, we've been living on this cash ever since.
What about your childhoods? They must have been quite considerably different, I think. There's a poem of yours called The Disquieting Muses, in which I think there's a certain amount of autobiography. Yes. And also you write a lot about the sea.
I was brought up on the northern coast of Massachusetts, and my whole childhood was spent on the ocean. I remember the very spectacular hurricanes we used to have, where my grandmother's cellar would be flooded and there would be sharks washed up in the garden and so forth. And the image of the sea has been with me ever since, even though I've been inland for a few years. And I think one always goes back to something as vivid and colorful as this sort of experience. And I know that the sea comes into a great many of my poems. Sometimes it's just a subconscious sea, a sort of flow of thoughts and so on. Other times it's the real sea itself.
Were you a happy child? Did you have a sort of sporty life, or did you live in your imagination a great deal?
Well, I think I was happy up to the age of about 9, very carefree, and I believed in magic, which influenced me a good bit. And then at 9, I was rather disillusioned. I stopped believing in elves and Santa Claus and all these little beneficent powers and became more realistic and depressed, I think, and then gradually became more adjusted about the age of 16 or 17. But I certainly didn't have a happy adolescence, and perhaps that's partly why I turned specially to writing. I wrote diaries, stories, and so forth, and was quite introverted during those early years.
What about you, Ted? In your poetry, the landscape of the poetry really is the landscape, isn't it, of the Yorkshire Dales?
Of West Yorkshire, yes, very much.
And the characters are very often rural types or, in fact, animals, the animal creation, particularly the wilder beasts like otters and stoats and so on.
I was interested in animals. I really began being interested in animals. In fact, my earliest memories are of my toys, which are all little lead animals, which you could buy then. And I had dozens of these. When I was 4, an aunt bought me an animal book, thick animal book, which is a sort of Bible for me for the next 5 years.
Did you manipulate them, or did you really participate? Did you feel you were almost a small animal yourself?
I don't know. I can't remember. And I used to make animals with plasticine and draw animals.
Were you a country boy?
Yes. Mathenroyd isn't really a village, but country comes right down on it, on every side. And my brother was a great one for wandering about with a rifle. And in fact, he did little else. And he used to take me along as a sort of retriever.
What was the line of your progress from there to Cambridge?
Well, then we left Mathenroyd when I was about 8. And all that then was sealed off. We moved to Mexborough, which was industrial and depressing and dirty. And, well, at the time, it made us all very unhappy, but it was really a very good thing. It became a much richer experience for me than my previous 7 years had been. But in being so different, it really sealed off my first 7 years. So that now I have memories of my first 7 years, which my first 7 years seems almost half my life. I've remembered almost everything because it was sealed off in that particular way and became a sort of brain, another subsidiary brain for me. And anyway, I went to Mexborough Grammar School, and I wasn't very interested in any lessons, but I was writing, and the teachers seemed interested in my writing, so I gradually concentrated absolutely everything on writing. It began to seem possible that through my writing I might go to university and get scholarships and so on.
Would you say that your temperaments are parallel, or do you think they're in conflict in a sense, that it's a marriage of opposites?
I think superficially we're very alike. We like the same things. We live at the same tempo, have the same sort of rhythm in almost every way. But obviously this is a very fortunate covering for temperaments that are extremely different, but that lead secret lives. You see, they content themselves in an imaginative world, so they never really come into open conflict.
You wouldn't like to give the impression, though, that you spend your whole married lives thinking up poems and reading them to each other.
I think our domestic life is practically indistinguishable from all the people who live around us. The only main difference is that Ted doesn't go out to work at 9 and come home at 5. He retires about 9 to his room and works. But I certainly have a life just like all the other housewives and mothers in our district, and shopping dishes and taking care of the baby and so forth. And I think very few people have an idea I'd do anything at all except household chores and so on.
And really, in 4 years, if you've written 80 poems, it's not really very many. You're not writing poems the whole time. You seem to go months and never write a thing. So really, your life is very much like everybody else's most of the time.
Where do you live?
In near Camden Town.
Really up by Primrose Hill and the zoo.
Sure.
That's one of the reasons we like it so much. We're always going to the zoo with the baby and so forth. We can hear the seals barking in the summertime.
How much room have you got to live in?
Oh, not enough. We have a very small flat, a bedroom, a sitting room, a kitchen and a bath, which is a rather a juggling affair when it comes to managing a 9-month-old baby. And we're dreaming of a house where I can shout to Ted from one end to the other and he won't be able to hear me. But I don't know how far away that is.
Do you find it necessary to keep yourselves separate from each other?
I can write with people in the room quite easily.
Yes, Ted's better at that
Sometimes.
than I am. I really need to be by myself. Otherwise, I'm too tempted to talk and so on. I'm much more distractible, I think, in that way.
Well, they say that 2 can live as cheap as 1, but even so, it must be quite expensive. Have you got jobs outside of writing?
No, not at present. We had in America, where we both taught.
And then I was a secretary for a while. I always can take up a secretarial job or a part-time job if we get close to starving, or if I see the larder is too bare, something to that effect. But we're quite flexible, since both of us are able to work and have worked together and then stopped as the circumstances have allowed us to.
Before then, I did just odd jobs, just for short times. I worked as a sort of script reader and as a night watchman, and I worked for a rose gardener for a little while. At present, we're living more or less on what we're... With writings help to eke it out, but our last lump of savings, which are mainly from teaching, is sort of running out. We'll have to get another lump now from somewhere.
And Ted had a grant, a writing grant, which was a help, but we actually look ahead from year to year and don't try very hard not to look ahead beyond that, because of where you're writing, you don't have any 20-year pension plans or anything of that sort, and need a bit more faith and brazenness, perhaps, I think, than if one has a steady job.
But would you have it any other way?
I wouldn't, no. Not at all. Even being a very practical and domestic housewife as I am, I think the advantages are too great to want to change.
You begin to worry about money if you get a job.
Has the baby made a big difference to the running of the house?
Well, actually, I was amazed when I found how easy she was. I had wondered if I'd be swallowed up in motherhood and never feel any time to myself, but somehow she's fitted in beautifully and is amazingly little trouble. I mean, she doesn't yell and cry, and she plays by herself and is very amusing. And I think both of us have written a good many poems to her and find her more entertaining than anything
Not
we've
just
experienced
pure.
so far.
She's kind of aerial, you know. She brings in a whole range of feelings, a whole world
And
that wasn't in the
experiences,
house
yes.
before. Like a cat, only much better.
I think we're
wider
both
octave.
very much family-oriented. I mean, I envision a large house sort of stocked with small children and small animals.
At what stage are you going to start introducing the child to actually listening to poetry?
She already has listened to nursery rhymes, which I consider a poetry. I don't believe in being self-conscious about it. I think that everything from little nursery rhymes and songs to Eliot's practical, practical cats, is perfect material.
I take it you can't both continue to draw on your childhood memories and so on for your poetry. What is the more continuing source, the more continuing inspiration for the writing you're doing now?
Well, apart from the experiences of your own life, of my experiences of my life, I also have, in a way, Sylvia's experiences of hers, and all the experiences that she's had in the past. It's like a medium who's an automatic writer, you know, just on a pad. And what she writes out needn't be at all the contents of her own mind. It needn't be anything she knows, but it's something that somebody in the room knows, or somebody that she's very close to knows. And in this way, two people who are sympathetic to each other, and who are right, who are compatible in this sort of spiritual way, they in fact make up one person. They make up one source of power, which you both use, and you can draw out material in incredible detail from this single shared mind. And I'm sure that this is certainly a source of a great deal in my poetry. I don't know whether it works the other way around. I suspect it does. It's not that you choose the same things to write about necessarily, and you certainly don't write about them in the same way. It's that you draw on an experience. It's as though you knew more about something than you, from your own life, have ever really learned. And in fact, it seems, from what I've seen of this, that I'm drawing also on my wife's knowledge of it.
It's a very hard thing to put into words, isn't it?
It's a complicated idea to
Yes.
get across, because you first of all to believe that this sort of telepathic union exists between two sympathetic people, which of course a lot of people don't believe.
Is that how you would have put it?
Me? Well, I think perhaps I'm a little more practical about it, not quite so abstract. I can give an example. For instance, Ted's interest in animals made me look back into my own life, and my father among other things, was a biologist and happened to keep bees. And I didn't think much about this at the time, but I've become very interested in beekeeping, and the image of beekeeping has become part of my poems. And I think this is a direct result of knowing Ted. I somehow know more about my own past through him than I would otherwise. But I'm also influenced by art, by paintings and sculpture. A lot of my poems describe paintings and take off from a visual image and go on from there.
I do find in your poetry certain similarities. You are interested in the same sort of world, and in a way you do write in a similar way about it. Don't you find, the two of you, that being married, being in close contact like you are, and also having a basic similarity of approach, that there's a great danger that your poetry will tend to almost collapse the one into the other?
I'd like to know how you think the poems are alike, because this is something that no one's ever remarked on before, and I've always thought that our subject matter in particular, and also the form in which we write, the forms, are really quite different, and I'd be interested to know where you think they coincide.
I don't think they're as different as all that. I think you're the type of contortion, the way that the line rides over into the next line, for instance, a sort of technical trick of vigor, the way you use syntax, words. Also, you both have a concern, I think, with the animal creation, not that other poets don't, and also with a type of rural landscape, and the way you use it is very similar, I think.
Well, I think this was true in our poems really before we ever knew each other or met each other. And that, in that sense, we would probably be alike, if we are at all alike, whether we had ever encountered each other. And so I don't think that this is a result of our meeting. This is something that went on before. I mean, we were writing for 10 years before we ever heard of each other.
And I think it's something we share with several other writers, too. Several other people writing now.
And the kind of toughness and knottiness that we admire, both of us, I think is again, something we've always admired, and perhaps that's why we met in the first place, because we both felt that we had similar interests.
Whenever we do happen to write about a similar thing, the interesting thing about it is how differently we do treat it and how differently we approach it.
I think one of the examples of this is that we each have a poem on a pig. Perhaps this is why people seem to think that we're alike. But I'm sure that anybody comparing these two poems would see an immense difference in the handling and attitude toward piggery that Ted has and that I have. I know my own distaste for a certain kind of slack lyrical quality or floweriness isn't really confined, to my own poetry and Ted's, but to anybody we know of who's writing now. And what we admire in each other, perhaps, is something we admire in other people, too.
Sylvia's pig is a legendary gargantuan pig. It's a sort of assembly of all piggishness and excessive piggeriness.
Oh, come now.
Whereas mine is what's left when a pig has disappeared. In other words, what's left of a pig when the pig's no longer a pig, when it's a dead pig. And in a way, this is the complete reversal of Sylvia's theme.
Does music play a part in your lives?
Well, I think Ted's much more musically inclined than I am. I learned to play the piano and the viola, and I played in the school orchestra, but this was more or less forced on me. And I happened to be tone deaf and unable to carry a tune and felt quite unhappy because of this. And it's only since I've known Ted that I've listened to music, particularly Beethoven. Actually, we started living under was it a death mask? I think it was a death mask of Beethoven. A life mask, I'm sorry.
I think Beethoven, for instance, has had more influence on me than any other single artist in any medium.
In what way?
Forming my temperament, I think, or giving it a certain set direction, one which it was very inclined to take.
In other words, you like the way he feels, you like the way that he expresses his own reality, the things he's seen and
yes,
thought about.
And this completely dominated me from the age of 17 until I was 26, when I really left all my records and gramophone in England. And I don't know how this influences directly your writing, but it certainly influences your imagination and the coherence of your imagination.
Well, I think a good way to round off this conversation would be to, in fact, let the listeners hear a poem from each of you.
This one is called Mushrooms, and it's simply about mushrooms from their own point of view. Overnight, very whitely, discreetly, very quietly, our toes, our noses take hold on the loam, acquire the air. Nobody sees us, stops us, betrays us. The small grains make room. Soft fists insist on heaving the needles, the leafy bedding, even the paving. Our hammers, our rams, earless and eyeless, perfectly voiceless, widen the crannies, shoulder through holes. We diet on water, on crumbs of shadow, bland-mannered, asking little or nothing. So many of us, so many of us. We are shells, we are tables, we are meek, we are edible, nudgers and shovers in spite of ourselves. Our kind multiplies. We shall by morning inherit the earth, our foot's in the door.
I'll read a poem called Pike. I am a very keen pike fisherman, and this is a memory of the first place I ever fished for pike, and the pike in it. The pike in this pond. Pike, 3 inches long, perfect pike in all parts, green tigering the gold. Killers from the egg, the malevolent aged grin. They dance on the surface among the flies, or move, stunned by their own grandeur, over a bed of emerald, silhouette of submarine delicacy and horror, 100 feet long in their world. In ponds, under the heat-struck lily pads, gloom of their stillness, logged on last year's black leaves, watching upwards, or hung in an amber cavern of weeds, the jaws hooked, clamp, and fangs not to be changed at this date, a life subdued to its instrument, the gills kneading quietly, and the pectorals. 3 we kept behind glass, jungled in weed, 3 inches, 4, and 4.5, fed fry to them. Suddenly there were 2. Finally 1, with a sag belly and the grin it was born with. And indeed they spare nobody. 2, 6 pounds each, over 2 feet long, high and dry and dead in the willow herb, one jammed past its gills down the other's gullet. The outside eye stared, as a vice locks, the same iron in this eye, though its film shrank in death. A pond I fished, 50 yards across, whose lilies and muscular tench had outlasted every visible stone of the monastery that planted them, stilled legendary depth. It was as deep as England. It held pike too immense to stir, so immense and old that past nightfall I did not cast, but silently cast and fished, with the hair frozen on my head, for what might move, for what I might move. The still splashes on the dark pond, owls hushing the floating woods, frail on my ear against the dream darkness beneath night's darkness had freed, that rose slowly towards me, watching.